Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. We speak to industry, marketing, and communications leaders and thought leaders on topics that are happening around us right now. The podcast, Law of Relevancy, is designed to keep us all up to date with what's happening, keep us relevant in our fields. Today, I'm joined by Vinny Tafuro. Vinny, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Cord, for having me.
Yeah, I'm Cord Zoen. I'm your host. And we're talking to Vinny today. I was really excited about having Vinny on the show. Vinny's someone I've known for, I want to say like 14 years now.
It's been quite a while.
Yeah, 14 or 15 years. Vinny was, I met him. Vinny was a member of the marketing and advertising industry here in Tampa Bay. And Vinny's had an interesting path since then. He's really branched off, and now Vinny is an economist.
Yeah, thanks. It has been. It's been at least 12 years or so, 15. And back when I was an advertising professional. And it's really in that background of advertising is what brought me to economics. It was all the interest in data and what we were doing as marketers with data.
Right.
10 years ago that really kind of tipped me into what we could do with data today and in the future.
Yeah, well, then that's the exact reason why I wanted to reach out to you. We've got our brand new studio here at BMP headquarters, and I was in the car the other day, and my personal experience over the last few months since COVID started has been that I've been super, super busy. A lot of people I know are extremely busy, and I know not every industry is busy right now. I know hospitality's down, restaurants have struggled, bars, things like that. But I know a lot of people are unbelievably busy. And I was on the highway and I was looking around me, and there was not, it's just, that's the one thing that we've gotten out of this entire COVID thing is that traffic is way down, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just the dichotomy of it all, the juxtaposition of the fact that here we are, most people that I know are busier than they've ever been right now, and yet we have half the traffic on the road. So are people being more productive with those commute hours? Are they using them to be more productive?
Wow. I think, absolutely in one sense, it shut everything down and just stopped. I remember the first week of the shutdown in mid-March, just looking at Google Maps and the traffic map and just green. Every interstate system in the entire country was just not being utilized. And this idea then, like within a week, companies that would have otherwise taken a decade, if they even ever tried to go fully virtual, were operating at 95 to 100% work from home within 7 days.
Yeah.
No other kind of scenario really, except something like the pandemic, would make that happen. And I think now we're going into 6+ months of it, and we're dealing with second waves and dealing with childcare and all of these other social community issues. We're realizing we can go even longer. You take companies like Facebook, Google, and some of the tech companies, like they're not looking to bring their employees back until next summer.
Yeah,
it's a full year and a half before they bring people back. What will it look like then?
That's a good question. My favorite story about a company going remote is REI. I don't know if you saw the story, but REI's headquarters, so they're famous as being a retailer of, hiking, outfitter type gear. They are selling their corporate headquarters so that all of their workers can work remote. So they actually folded it into their branding, which makes a lot of sense because people who shop there want to be remote.
Yeah.
So why can't the employees work from remote?
That's awesome. I did not catch that. I know, REI first kind of caught my radar with like this kind of weird workplace thing was when, they shut their website off and closed on Black Friday to tell people, don't go shopping today, take the day off and actually do something outdoors.
That's super cool.
Which, the internet shopping experience will be there on Saturday. So I'm gonna have to look more into that because I do see this impacting commercial real estate over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. That there's a huge question mark around like these collaborative workspaces and even dedicated offices and things like that. What they're doing with them. I know, for example, one of my neighbors, their son is visiting from New York, and he works at Spotify, and they are not coming back to their offices, I think, for like a whole nother year.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable because God knows what their rent is. I think they've got 2 floors in some building like the Empire State Building or something.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine? And you're not utilizing that space at all, right? But that gets us back to like the reason why I wanted to reach out to you is that I remember a while ago, you and I were talking, and you actually, I believe, talked about this a little bit at a TED Talk about how the economy and how it's measured and how that's really changed.
Yeah.
And the GDP, which has been our de facto measurement or metric for the economic growth, is really not very relevant any longer. And it seems like with this work remotely kind of a situation we're all in, it really brings that to the forefront and makes it's super clear that you're right.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you reaching out because it's something that I've kind of, as the crisis has gone on, I'm like, wow, all of my stuff is really relevant right now. And I feel a little bit bad that all of a sudden I'm on this writing binge and going, this is connected to what I've been talking about for almost 10 years now. And the fact is GDP was created 80 years ago in 1934. Congress, in the wake of the Great Depression or of the crash of 29, asked an economist, hey, what happened? And for the first time, they created a report called National Wealth. And what National Wealth did was show that the United States, in the measurement of what we produce, the goods and services and things that were exchanged for money, that we had lost 40% of our value between 1929 and 1933.
Wow.
And even when the report was created, it was said this isn't a good indicator of the welfare of the nation. Just an accounting of what we've produced, whether it's an oil spill or it is a cure for cancer that's sold. It's just what we produce. And so the thing is we were operating as a nation long before we had GDP.
Right.
We just started measuring it 80 years ago. And what I think today is in this crisis, what we're seeing is social capital needs to be measured. What we produce is important, but there should be no reason in physics or the natural world why we couldn't have pushed pause at 100% for 3 weeks to get through this. But we had to balance how much financial damage were we willing to take compared to health influence. And that's because we're not measuring the social capital that was there. And I think in this crisis now, we really have to look at what social capital are we losing in this period.
So what is social capital?
Social capital is, economists will refer to it because they know it exists, but they refer to it kind of as this dark matter of society that's hard to measure. And so therefore it's mostly ignored. I kind of look at it as if GDP counts the 1/3 of things in society that we exchange money for, social capital is the 2/3 of society that we don't capture in GDP. So it's a parent staying home to take care of their child. It's a neighbor taking care of a neighbor with some sort of loan of a tool or of goods, or not goods, but of helping somebody out. It's caring for your elderly parents. It is providing education. It's mentoring people. All of those things that we call, kind of our own social capital. Like when we explain, on LinkedIn, why you have a network and the value. It's all of those things, but it's much broader. It's not just social capital for the purpose of getting a job. It's social capital for teaching a child how to use a spoon and be prepared for kindergarten.
Wow. So somewhere between manufacturing a widget and caring for your neighbor, there's probably on that spectrum, there's probably other pieces, like you mentioned, education. Like, how do we account for information in our economy and the buying and selling of information?
So, and I think that's the challenge with measuring social capital is, unlike the production economy of the last century where, hey, we can measure what's produced and sold, done. Social capital is going to have to be measured with more than one metric and be unique to different places and locations. One aspect of looking at it that I focused on early on in my TED Talk was the idea of investing in education, because If you look at the internet sector, and I use Facebook as an example, they have a metric, average revenue per user. And the higher socioeconomic education level of a user, the more valuable they are to the Facebook network and the internet as a whole. That's one metric. There's a woman in New Zealand that's a former member of their parliament, wrote a book about what women are worth in the work of domestic care. She's got a TED Talk where she talks about doing time surveys. So the same way we survey the commercial sector for what they're producing each year, we could survey the domestic sector and the care sector to see where are we spending our time. And typically what she finds when a country measures its time usage, caretaking and unpaid work, domestic work, is the largest sector of the economy. The next largest sector, the first largest paid sector, is the banking and finance industry.
Wow. So how are you seeing some of these pieces show up in places where people are investing?
I think in looking at the tech sector and also the business sector as a whole, you've got movements like conscious capitalism or the B Corp movement, where you start to see people putting metrics to individual companies. So a company can decide, we can do all of these things. And that's kind of, conscious capitalism is that idea that we can be stakeholder oriented. It's not all about the profits. Our company has to have a purpose and a story. And we look at, I always say, your customers become advocates, your employees become team members, your vendors are partners, and your shareholders do well over the long term because you're taking into a bigger picture into account. What B Corp certification does is take conscious capitalism and gives it metrics so you can actually measure and provide.
So if you're doing these things, you're taking these actions or doing these activities, like
you've hit these metrics,
right.
You've hit a certain threshold, and you can point to a report the same way you point to your financial report saying we're financially solvent. You can say we're also consciously solvent. That we're walking the walk. And that's really a protection against whitewashing or greenwashing. You can build a LEED certified level building, but how do you prove it unless you get certified?
Well, it seems like, I'm not an expert in B Corps, but it seems like a lot of the things that are in there and what I have read about them are just good ideas anyway. Like, you really should be looking for opportunities to support community anyway.
Yeah.
Because if your community is doing better, you potentially might have more customers. There's just a healthier exchange around, just the environment we're in, right?
Absolutely. This is a return to old values.
Yeah.
This is, you look at the organic food movement or the non-GMO movement. My grandmother, for the first 50 years of her life, ate organic all the time. There were no GMOs to speak of, or very few. I look at it, Gary Vaynerchuk, one of what I believe his best works was the Thank You Economy. And unfortunately, it never really got the credit. But, in that, he said that the companies that really look deep into their customers, deep into their stakeholders, and go, how do we provide the most value for everybody? They're the ones that are going to get the most return. And I think, so none of this is new. It's all just good ideas, but they're good ideas that in the 80s, 90s, and early part of this century really just kind of got, hey, if we can get it cheaper in Asia, let's get rid of this factory in Akron, Ohio. If we can do this way, well, then we can pay our teachers a little bit less, or that kind of thing. It was the good ideas just kind of got forgotten because we had this idea that as long as GDP is growing, all the people that are shed by the economy will just find new things to do.
Who are some of the best examples of people who've gotten it for a long time? Like people like New Balance, like companies like that?
I'm not as familiar with New Balance. I know, from looking at their stakeholder, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream is a B Corp, and really has worked on their supply chain and helping to teach their vendors, hey, we did this because of these reasons, and we want to teach our vendors that they can do this. From a larger standpoint, you mentioned REI, Patagonia is one. Whole Foods has been a good example of really doing that. Not as much now that they've been acquired by Amazon. So they're changing, but you always wonder with that, how much is in the long term is Whole Foods going to influence the host in that sense and change some of the things at Amazon? And you look at Amazon has made some moves in the last 2 years on paying workers
that you brought
more.
Up Whole Foods, like I know that when Whole Foods was more new in the concept of the entire organic market and whatnot, there seemed to be just like this buzz about shopping there.
Yeah.
And I don't detect that nearly as much as I used to.
No, I think it's new. I'll go back to, non-GMO foods is a decade or more ago. You really went, 10, 12 years ago, you could have a political discussion based on organic foods because people are like, it's not a problem, it is a problem. And what Whole Foods did is, because at the time you had your like super granola organic grocers that wouldn't touch anything that was not GMO. Or that had GMOs in it. And then you had your large chains like, even Publix or Walmart or Costco that sold all conventional food. Sure. What Whole Foods did was Whole Foods, again, like Ben and Jerry's, they would work with their suppliers. So if you were a farmer that wanted to go GMO or organic, Whole Foods would buy from you for the 5 years that it took to become certified, because that's part of the process. Is if you're a farmer, you can't just say, hey, I'm organic this year. You have to go organic over the course of 5 years. And your neighborhood organic grocery stores wouldn't buy it unless it was certified.
Got it. So they were enabling that transition.
They enabled it. And so that came through their employees and the culture. But now Costco's the biggest supplier of organic foods in the country. So, Walmart keeps adding organic. So in addition to having kind of, higher price points and selling to Amazon and all of these things, the culture, they kind of put their niche out of business in a sense but they've enabled the country to eat better.
Sure.
And have a better conversation, because now talking about healthy eating is no longer a politically divided conversation. It's a conversation about how do we eat better to improve our immune systems and, fight the pandemic because we're eating whole foods.
And it's a better capitalist idea too. Yeah. I mean, in theory, I would think that probably some of these organic foods and companies and distributors that are distributing that are more profitable. I mean,
absolutely.
You're paying twice as much sometimes, 3 times as much for something because it's organic.
Yeah.
And it's, I think consumers have shown they're willing to spend that for something better.
They are. And so you build a niche, you tell a story, and you also then in that you spread a message,
So where do we go from here? So what's the next move? I know that you're involved in some think tanks. Like, what is the product of those think tanks around economics and the theories that you're working on?
So I spent most of the last decade between 2 books on how can companies be more empathetic, how can we handle a labor crisis if automation takes jobs, how do we reconfigure what jobs look like? Founded Conscious Capitalism Florida chapter, and really what looked at in the last 2 years, what's come from that is I'm always a first principles person. How do you go, this is a symptom, not the problem. This is a symptom, not the problem. Why were companies not empathetic? Because people said shareholders came first. Well, we've proven over the last decade that doesn't have to be the case. Sure. All right, if automation is taking driving jobs, well, how do we make caretaking and education more relevant as jobs that are well paid, so that when you have a 12-year-old that says, I want to be a school teacher, you don't shudder because they're not going to make a good living. That's scary, So what we've decided, what we really looked at and what I discovered was the field of economics itself is not focused on improving the market. The way the think tank network is set up right now, you've got your liberal think tanks that focus on how the state can supplement where the market fails. So things like skyrocketing healthcare costs, education, those kind of things. The market's not doing a great job in some of those areas. So your liberal think tanks go, hey, the state can come in. Your neoliberal, more conservative think tanks are all about providing data to the government to say, hey, if you deregulate it, it'll work itself out. And what I really looked at was, okay, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've been in business my whole life. I know business can do really great things because there's really good examples of, before even conscious capitalism, or B Corp certification. There's examples of companies, but there's no scalability in it. And so what we wanted to do was create a think tank for the market. So instead of providing policy recommendations to the government telling it to regulate or deregulate a sector, we're going to assume that deregulation has happened, and we're going to give the market more holistic measures to be more holistic in how it approaches problems, so that problems don't come down to, hey, is it financially viable? We want a company to be able to say, is it socially valuable and viable? So
yeah, well, that's super interesting stuff. So where can people find your publications or your writings?
So our institute is evolveeconomics.org. That's our institute website, and we've got a publication on Medium called Industrial Age Detox, because a lot of what we look at is how do we take what we've learned in the last century, remove what's toxic and not helpful, and apply those lessons to what we're doing today. So, obviously in the throes of the Great Depression, creating a new metric for measuring financial capital was important, but it's not as important today. So in this crisis, how do we use that example and go, okay, maybe we need new metrics. What do we need to measure? Okay, social capital is a place to start.
Very cool. I'm excited to see how you're going to start measuring it. I in my mind, I've got swirling around ways that I think you could do it. Maybe it's like website traffic to social networks or sentiment analysis and things like that might be indicators of trends and things like that in the social world. Even you mentioned like the education sector. I think we're in the middle of a huge shift in education. I mean, there's so much low-priced education out there. Like, I'm really feeling that like universities are becoming irrelevant, except for the fields where you absolutely have to have labs and very expensive equipment and things like that. I mean, if somebody wants to be a programmer these days, they don't have to leave their bedroom, and they can become a very good programmer.
I mean, my first half of my career was programming. I learned in my bedroom and on the job. I was not formally trained in computer science at all.
And I'll tell you, as an employer, I don't care if somebody has a degree. No. I only care if they can do the job and if they can get along with others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I think education does still remain relevant is, like I said, the costs have to be controlled. Mm-hmm. I think moving back to a model where full-time faculty handle not only teaching class, but also administering the departments. Because right now, we've added this middle layer of administration to colleges that then depend heavily on adjunct professors that are part-timers that don't actually invest their time in the college. I think that changing that paradigm lowers tuitions, lowers costs, because I look at community colleges and private liberal arts community colleges, gathering people. And especially if we can get it where colleges is this kind of permeable place that you go to, not just in 18 to 25, but anytime through your life, that's a place where dialogue can happen, where exchange can happen. And like I said, we're not going to be virtual forever.
Yeah.
And I think that is a place where local communities can find value in that face-to-face exchange. And I hope that still continues.
Yeah, like I absolutely agree. I hope it becomes much better. Well, Vinny, thank you so much for coming in here. I really appreciate you sharing your ideas with us. And again, just tell us one more time, where can they find your thought leadership?
Absolutely. So you can find the Institute as Evolve Economics, and also at Evolve Economics on Twitter and Instagram. I'm Vinny Tafuro with a Y. I'm sure it'll be up on the screen. And that's my that's my handle everywhere. And the publication on Medium is Industrial Age Detox.
Fantastic. And I'm Cord Zoen. I'm your host of The Law of Relevancy, and we'll be back again with some more interesting episodes around other things that we're observing in our marketplace. And so thank you for joining us. We'll be back.